government control was effective, special privileges granted, and uneconomic measures taken. Special subsidies were paid after September 1937, and artificial stimulation was given to indigenous production under the 1938 Act to promote production of important materials. There were enormous imports of ore, pig iron, and scrap. Large quantities of scrap were collected by a special government-directed control company. Drastic measures were taken to channel iron into selected industries. The result, while uneconomic, was a tremendous increase in products such as ships, cars, tanks, and other war materials requiring iron as an essential component. All these materials, especially aluminum, were essential as war materials. While the planned increase was not realized in any instant, substantial increases were effected both in indigenous production and by way of import at great expense and by unscientific methods. Plan 3 showed that the purpose of the peacetime production of light metal alloys was for conversion to wartime production of aircraft and parts. Plan 4 provided for increased production from 76 million yen in 1938 to 200 million yen in 1941. In addition, Japan continued to import enormous quantities of machine tools. Between 1937 and 1940, the Japanese Army arsenals alone purchased from the United States $22,500,000 worth of machine tools and more than any Japanese industrial company purchased. Control was secured by the enactment of the machine tool industry law in 1938, and there were the usual subsidies and privileges. The result was enormous expansion of native production and increased imports. From a wartime capacity in 1936 of 700 Army planes and 700 Navy planes, by 1942, described as the first wartime year, the capacity was to be increased to 4,000 planes for the Army, 6,000 to meet emergencies, and 3,000 for the Navy. It was also planned that even if peacetime actual demands were 3,000 planes, by the 8th month of the first year of war, this capacity would equal 20,000 planes annually. Total production for the first year of the war would reach 13,000, and the second year 30,000. This increase was to be provided by converting the facilities of the other industries already discussed. While in fact the planned capacity was not attained, the undisputed statistics show that from 1935 to 41, Army aircraft bodies increased from 349 to 3,787. Navy aircraft bodies from 408 to 2,080, and total military aircraft engines from 584 to 11,654. C. Mobilization of Japan's economy for war. The surveys of the basic war industries, in addition to showing the planning for expansion and its results, have also shown the methods used to stimulate the expansion and how in these industries government control, direction, financial aid, import restrictions, subsidies, and other aids were all employed for that purpose.
In the strategic plans of the Army and in the tactical training given to the Army in preparation for war. First, expansion and strengthening of the Army. The growth of the Japanese Army during the period of preparation for war is reflected in the Army budget figures. The budget for the Ministry of War increased slowly from 1931 to 1936, from 247 million yen to 516 million yen. As shown before, according to the accused Sato, only 40% of the budget was being devoted to the China hostilities, and the balance was being used for armament expansion. While the validity of the Sato speech has been attacked during the course of the proceedings, the statements contained therein have received excellent confirmation and evidence offered by the defense during the general phases. Areas in which there were no hostilities. Such a huge percentage, more than double that being used in a great war of aggression, was not being stored for the defense of Japan. Its only possible purpose was in preparation for further wars of aggression. Again, it is a well-known fact, amply supported by the evidence, that Japan, all during the period, was carrying out intense air operations in China. Yet 4% of her aviation gas sufficed to meet the requirements of those operations. The remaining 96% was being held in non-fighting areas for other wars. As disclosed in the evidence on economic preparations, not only was the armament and ammunition for war use enormously increased during this period, but also Army personnel was increased and put on a war footing. According to information furnished by the First Demobilization Bureau, the liquidator of the affairs of the War Ministry, the total strength of the Japanese Army from January 1, 1930 to January 1, 1937 was 250,000 men. By and abrogation of the short-term service system, the term of supplementary reserve service for the Army was lengthened to 12 years and 4 months. On April 1, 1941, the law was further revised to allow the conscripts to be enrolled in the Army at stations in regions other than Japan proper, without regard to census registration. Due to the increased demand on the armed services, the increase of work, and the intricacy of organization, the law abolished the distinction between the first and second reserves and provided that those who had completed active service should be enlisted in the reserve for the whole length of term, formerly divided between the two reserve services. The duration of the term for supplementary reservist education was lengthened from 120 to 180 days, effective April 1, 1941. Other steps were taken to put the system on a war footing. On May 10, 1941, the National Defense Security Law became effective. There was also in operation the Military Secret Protection Law to guard against the leakage of military secrets and the defense resources. By July 1941, the month previous to actual military movements, Japan was actively mobilizing its forces for action. Unquestionably, no document would have higher priority for destruction than a strategic plan. And we may well rest assured that any copy of the plans which escaped the holocaust of the air raid was destroyed pursuant to order. While the defense denied that there were such plans other than defensive ones until shortly before the Pacific War started, they admit that both the alleged defensive plans and all copies of operation plans for the South were destroyed by fire. In Yasuda prior to 1941, military drill separated from gymnastics in 1939 in middle schools took 2 or 3 hours alone, and in colleges and high schools 1.5 hours, and in addition there were 4 to 6 days annually of field training. In 1941, this was amended so that middle schools were taught 70 to 100 hours a year with 4 or 5 days field training depending on grade. After the China incident, students were indoctrinated with militaristic thoughts under the supervision of the military. In June 1938, the Education Ministry under Araki issued instructions that the students must be made to realize how great and important their duties were to the state. This mission was well executed. Colonel Nugent, basing his statements on his own experience as a teacher in Japan from 1938 to 1941, and the comprehensive study of the Japanese educational system made by the Civil Information and Education section of SCAP under his direction, testified that his teachings in the Japanese schools inculcated ultra-nationalism, aggressive militarism, blind devotion to authority, belief in Japan's ambition to be dominant in Asia. In April 1941, the students were told that the failure of the Japanese army to conquer China was because the United States and Britain
had aided China and that the great enemy of Japan was not China, but those countries. The new textbooks introduced taught Japan's superiority, so confusing, packed with mystery and legend, and containing so much admiration and homage to military officers, and the idea of absolute subjection of the individual in favor of the state, that they were destroyed at the order of the witness Maida in 1945. 1937, Professor Yanihara, after Kido had demanded his dismissal because he had written an article on peace, was compelled to resign from Tokyo Imperial University. In 1937, Ochi's 7 other professors and certain assistant professors were dismissed as sympathetic to peace, and all were arrested. Despite the fact that Ochi was acquitted in 1940, he was not reinstated until October